Hi, this is Evelyn, and I'm going to talk about native ways of applying theory towards wellness. In addition to intergenerational trauma, alcohol use or misuse is high, beginning with the youth. What the children see is what they tend to reenact because they see the parents or grandparents doing alcohol. Hasselbrog and his colleagues mentioned that Alaska natives mentioned early onset of intoxication at 11.5 years of age and onset of regular drinking 14.5 years of age, while infant mortality rates remains high at 22% than that for the entire U.S. population as a whole. And use of alcohol during pregnancy is 1.5 times as high. 4 of the top 10 causes for death is alcohol related, and they are injuries, chronic liver disease, cirrhosis, and suicide, and homicide. Efforts to prevent and treat alcohol problems among the American Indian population may be more effective if native beliefs and approaches are incorporated. Alcohol problems also may be prevented through policies regulating the sale and use of alcohol in Indian communities. The American Indians and Alaska Natives' infant mortality rate has declined, and yet it still remains high. Compounding problems caused by alcohol are immense, including physical and emotional, and the ever typical stereotyping of the drunken Indians. Many Indian people believe that the loss of culture is the primary cause of many of their existing social problems, especially those associated with alcohol. Many of the community-based alcohol treatment programs in Indian communities across the country have a strong cultural or spiritual component that is intended to revitalize traditional beliefs and serve as the primary source of individual strength and maintaining sobriety. Many, let's see, many, many natives have lost their identity and culture due to alcoholism and drug use. The overuse of drugs and alcohol can deviate people from their normalcy and become only attuned to their addictions, where they live for their next fix or drink only. Bouvet talks about how some researchers have developed attitudes about how research distances themselves from the indigenous worldviews of and traditions of spirituality. He says the research community, however, has been reluctant to accept the idea that culture and Indian spirituality may be important to the prevention and treatment of alcohol problems. At least two reasons exist for this attitude. First, non-Indian views of the psychology of behavior are primarily secular and for the most part relegate culture to a peripheral role. Second, methods to measure spirituality, cultural beliefs, and values have not been well developed, hindering scientific study in those areas. One of the problems of applying theory to alcohol and substance abuse among Alaska Natives and other indigenous peoples is that the theories are applicable to the white society only. When applied to the indigenous peoples, it becomes ineffective. More recently, Native scholars have worked hard to study on wellness and sobriety to help in the understanding and providing some ways to learn and apply research-based knowledge to coping with alcohol and the maintaining of sobriety and deterring other health effects. One study was done by Hodge Lemon Cross and is discussed in Moving from Colonization Toward Balance and Harmony, a Native American Perspective on Wellness. Hodge and colleagues discussed the current studies and treatments that are not applicable to natives. They mentioned that natives who have counseling for mental health issues are expected to accept the dominant society's ways of treatment. A native perspective model concepts are developed to study the native beliefs and spiritualism and how that affects the whole as a person. The whole is mind, body, spirit, and context. The native perspective on how spiritualism on wellness model describes how the mind, body, spirit are one thing. The context refers to the environment. In this way, the study reflects how natives involve or that incorporate. Oh, hold on. Oh, spiritualism that involves spiritualism and how recovery from alcoholism and other issues can be used if there is imbalance within the core mind, body, spirit, and context, then there is a problem somewhere. For example, perhaps there is imbalance in the body with the body. If there is alcohol usage, which will in turn affect the rest of the parts, mind, body, spirit, and context. When all four areas are in balance, we are said to be healthy. Without intervention, balance will not be optimal. As long as humans survive, some form of balance exists naturally. A second study has been done by Hazel and Mohat and is discussed in Cultural and Spiritual Coping and Sobriety, Informing Substance Abuse Prevention for Alaska Native Communities. Hazel and Mohat discuss, a study that included Native Alaskan study participants themselves. The study involved focus groups that were charged with defining alcohol usage, spiritualism, and culture. They learned from these focus groups that what each of these components meant to them. For example, spirituality is viewed as an integral component of culture, and spiritual development is essential to a self-identity. It is a process of opening to what the Yupik refer to as Ilam Ingwa, the eye of awareness or eye of the universe, cosmos, God, to meet one's real self in relationship to the world around. In the Yupik worldview, all people are born as spiritual beings and the eye of awareness is open. For the people that wish to remain or maintain their sobriety, their paths may include seeing and visiting with elders and people who are sober, seeing the effects of alcohol on their family and community, honoring family and community expectations of sobriety, helping others along the path to sobriety, incorporating what the people already know and traditionally are accustomed to helping and working towards maintaining sobriety. Okay, so the third study was done by Walter Simone and Evans Campbell. They reported a new stress coping model for American Indians and Alaska Natives, and which incorporates cultural factors and trauma, that is, historical trauma and protective functions of family and community, spirituality and traditional healing practice, and the American Indian identity attitudes. The model was made as a framework that entails the stresses of American Indians and Alaska Natives' lives. For example, trauma or historical trauma, violent crimes, assault, traumatic life events, child abuse and neglect, discrimination, unresolved grief, and mourning. The framework goes on to add the buffers that can aid in strengthening psychological and emotional health, decreasing substance abuse, and mitigating the effects of the traumatic stressors. The culture buffers example listed are community and family, spiritual coping, traditional health practices, identity attitudes, and enculturation. The framework additionally includes the outcomes of health. These are the consequences of issues that are the effects of the stressors. Once the coping skills or the buffers leads to the better control of the health outcomes, for example, HIV risk, morbidity, alcohol and drug use, PSTD, anxiety, depression. These are examples used in the article. Other health outcomes could be used, for example, diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, etc. According to the Walters and colleagues, this model can be applied to other indigenous people. People who have a history of trauma in regards to health, history, race, third, fourth world context could use this model as well as researchers who want an understanding of how indigenous people are different. Walters and colleagues conclude that the use of this model will yield more culturally valid information from which post-colonial interventions can be designed. Specifically, identification of American Indian resilience and cultural protective factors will facilitate incorporation of these cultural processes and empirically based prevention and intervention research efforts. The indigent stress coping model thus reflects a decolonizing framework from which culturally relevant and valid data can be drawn, and ultimately culturally relevant interventions develop. Native Americans, Alaska Natives make up groups of indigenous peoples who have lengthy plights stemming from histories and trauma following colonization. There are many Eurocentric theories that can only be applied to Anglo societies. The indigenous peoples are people with different worldviews and their paths towards sobriety. Health outcomes should include their spiritual and cultural buffers that they only know of. It makes perfect sense to apply the research-based studies done in the past that includes the cultural aspects of wellness. 3 of them are briefly mentioned in this report. Policies have been applied in the past that have failed. For example, the 1932 banning of alcohol to Indian people. The legislation was repealed in 1953. Prohibitions have been put in place and they have failed. More recently, alcohol and substance use has been deemed a disease of the brain. Let's see. There's more pictures. Indigenous people. Here we go. More recently, alcohol and substance abuse has been deemed a disease of the brain, and non-native approaches such as detoxification, pharmacotherapy, behavioral therapy, inpatient treatment, and Alcoholics Anonymous have been modified to fit traditional beliefs. Change is imminent and new studies being done all the time, and thanks to our native scholars, there will be new ways and new thoughts of coping with different issues in the lives of Native Alaskans. Native American.